Well, hey everybody, we're going to go ahead and get going. Thanks so much for coming to this wonderful presentation of Suzanne Wainwright-Evans, the Bug Lady. This is an OBA event. Those of you who are new to OBA, welcome. We're very glad you're here. It is the Organic Horticulture Benefits Alliance. And what we do is we educate. We teach about things organically. Primary focus is horticulture, gardening, but we care about agriculture, the food. We eat a lot. We get a lot of nutritionists in, doctors, really passionate about that. Also, anything else that may impact our health, something we're passionate about. The whole world is one thing. We're a part of it, just like our food's a part of it, just like animals are part of it. So really care about the environment, really care about this place. So, and we are bringing just top-notch education. We do a lot of live events, but in COVID, we've really been doing a lot of Zoominars, webinars, and that's what we do. So our mission is to help the world be better and do it through kind of organic horticulture education. So glad y'all are here. We have a volunteer board of directors. They are pretty awesome. There they are. Good group of folks, farmers, business people, compost makers, arborists. There's me. Oh, look, same shirt. Kind of awkward, right? Don't tell anyone, okay? All right, great. So we just try to spread the word. We're not the only ones in Houston doing awesome education. Urban Harvest is our partner for this presentation, and they connect Houstonians to food. They're all about local, quality, healthy food, farmers markets, education, school gardens, neighborhood gardens. They're incredible at that stuff. And there's their mission there, to cultivate thriving communities through gardening and access to healthy local food. Great organization. Really proud to be kind of partners with them on this. In fact, this is our parent organization for OBA. That's super cool stuff too. Do want to highlight some of our amazing sponsors. Folks really stepped up to make this event as great as it can be to bring Suzanne in. Anume Farms is one of them. This is a beautiful organic farm in Fayette County. You can see their title there, A Nutrient Me, Anumi, pretty cool stuff. They grow organic food for food banks. So they just do an incredible job. It's a nonprofit, just doing incredible work. There's Vicki there. She is our board member, but also she's the primary farmer in this organization. So as you can see, growing for the greater good. And, thousands and thousands of pounds of food have come out of this phenomenal farm and get to people who needed it pretty desperately. So great job, Anume. Arbor True, really great. Anytime anybody wants an arborist, I say Arbor True, just because I know that these guys do scientific arbor care. They're a certified master arborist, and they're passionate about trees. So healthy trees can be very valuable to your property. Less healthy trees, not so much. So really, really great folks, really great guys, doing a great job. So check out Arbor True, great website when you get a chance. Great chat feature also. Hey, Home Show Garden Pros. So this is the radio show. I'm the host. There I am right there. Different shirt this time, luckily, right? And yeah, really good website. We talk about kind of organic gardening, how to get solutions in your space. Not overtly, but really the goal is to do something that is earth kind that works. We get these experts on. We talk about them. There's the listen button up there. You can listen anytime you want up there, and then you can always ask a question. So a lot of fun, a lot of jokes, a lot of good advice coming from that. So check that out. Phenomenal organization called the Joyce Sarant Foundation. This is a nonprofit that just is all about improving the lives of women, children, animals, and the environment. Excuse me. Four very important things. I think we'd all agree that those are like, extremely important things. And, it's funny because all of this whole planet is one thing. I mentioned that earlier. And so it's like, these are just the ones that we don't want to leave out, So big thanks to Joyce Sarant Foundation. They are very kind of consistent supporters of OBA. Really proud that they're part of it. I'm proud to know this organization. So doing great work. Microlife, phenomenal fertilizer, all organic biological fertilizer. So we OBA in Houston are so lucky because it's easy for us to be organic, partly because Microlife is so phenomenal. So easy to get out there. You can see their slogan there: healthy soils, healthy plants, healthy people. They're doing a great job. Other cities, it'd be a lot easier to spread the organic word to other cities if they had something like Microlife there. So really cool stuff. Great job there. Pretty sure Mike's on this talk. Well, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Bug Lady. So Suzanne Wainwright-Evans is an entomologist that cares about the predator-prey cycle for insects and how that affects greenhouse growing, our gardens, things like that. So she's going to really get into some of that phenomenal world of predator prey with insects, and how you can access it, how you can kind of gain the benefit of the predators, especially when you remove a lot of the non-organic chemicals from your kind of toolbox. So you don't need them, and they hurt this cycle. So without further ado, Suzanne, so glad you're here. Take it away.
Thank you for having me. I wasn't sure exactly what to call the title tonight, but I just called it Warfare in the Landscape because, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but it's an extremely violent thing too when you watch things that are going on. A really good example last night, if some of you caught my Instagram feed, is there was unfortunately a dead mouse at my door, but the carrion beetle showed up and it was going to take care of the problem. And it was trying to get that mouse over so that it could bury it in the yard to use as part of, the ecology. So, I mean, I was totally grossed out because I don't do dead animals, but at the same time, I couldn't stop watching. So it's really intriguing and interesting because there's a lot of stuff that goes on outside. And ever since I was probably in middle school is when I really discovered insects and decided this is what I wanted to go into. And I really think that I learned a lot by just sitting and watching. And that's what I do today. Like with the carrion beetle last night, I just sat and watched the behavior. And so I think it's important for us to sometimes take the time to watch what's going on in the ecology so we can learn from it and then use it to our benefit to manage pests or not manage them if they don't need to be managed, which leads into a little bit about what I do for a living. I mean, all my friends know that I do bug stuff with plants, but I just wanted to show you guys a couple pictures of in non-COVID times what my day at work is kind of like, where I'm going and either working with ornamentals like poinsettias on the top right, or down the lower left, those are crotons. Working with growers, dealing with pest issues like that, hydroponic lettuce up in the top left, and on the lower right, I've been working with quite a bit of cannabis and hemp the last few years. But what I do is I come in and we evaluate the whole situation and then decide how we're going to manage the pests. And I definitely focus on using biological control. And in fact, in all these crops here, we are using biological control to manage pests. So that's really where my focus is. And then teaching growers how again, to reduce their pesticide sprays by using beneficials. But again, occasionally there are times we do need to come in and do knockdown sprays. And if we need to do that, picking products that are softer for the environment, that are going to be safer with the beneficials and safer for people. So it's kind of like a whole package thing of what I do when I work with growers. Now, when it comes to biological control outdoors, there's been a big pushback, believe it or not, when we talk about using beneficials outside. But the number one thing people always say is, oh, well, at least the beneficials, they'll just fly away. Also, they're like in a greenhouse, you can control the environment. You can set, your temperatures, humidity, and things like that. You can't control it outside. So how are you going to make the beneficials work? There's this idea that beneficials can't control pests to a satisfactory level. And one of the biggest things, which has been very frustrating to me, again, working with commercial growers since the 90s, there's this pushback that, oh, well, if we grow with biocontrol agents, the end consumers won't like our plants because they're going to see the beneficials or they don't work well enough. So there's been a lot of naysaying about using biocontrol agents, but I have to say, in the last few years, things have really, really changed. And I've been really pleasantly surprised at how fast and how many people now are adopting biocontrol indoors and outdoors. When it comes to biocontrol outdoors, one of the biggest things I say all the time is this is where biocontrol started. I actually think it's easier to do biocontrol outside than it is in an enclosed greenhouse facility, because when you're in an enclosed facility, you are keeping out all your indigenous native population of beneficials, where if you're trying to do biocontrol outdoors, where you may be doing some releasing or just trying to encourage your native ones, they're already there and they can come to the rescue. So it really it's not as hard to do outside as people think. And of course, it depends on the pest, but when you think about it, I'm looking at my window right now and I can see several maple trees, a lilac, a red bud. All those plants right now are being eaten on by insects, and there are beneficials out there working to control them. So we learn from Mother Nature. All these biocontrol agents that are commercially produced, where do they come from? They came from the outside in the environment. So you can absolutely do this outside. And one thing that people keep missing is our native beneficials. And when I say native, I'm going to include established beneficials, like the Asian multicolored ladybird beetle. It's not native, but it's part of the ecology now here. It's established. But they did a study several years ago. It's been 14 years. But they found that the beneficial insects, the parasitoids, predators, basically provide about $57 billion worth of benefits to commercial growers here in the landscape in the United States. So basically, if beneficial insects weren't here to manage these problems, that's how much more we'd have to spend to get these problems under control. And so people need to, give them credit on that they are doing a lot for us out there. So what is biocontrol? And, if you talk to me about lectures and talks, I absolutely hate, in a way, definitions. We all know what biocontrol is. I mean, we don't need to find it. Good bugs that eat bad bugs. Now we are starting to include a little bit more, and on the lower right you can see microbial products, because it's a fungus that's feeding on insects. So basically biocontrol can encompass insects, mites, and pathogens as far as the world that I am working in. Now we have 3 types of biocontrol. There's classical, which we're really not going to talk much about because it doesn't apply for us. This is more of what the government does, stuff they're looking at for the brown marmorated stink bug, spotted lanternfly. These are big government programs. And so it's not anything that we on a homeowner, commercial grower level are going to be involved with, but they generally go to the native country where the invasive pest came from, look for what controls it there, and look to see if they can possibly introduce it. And they, people like to harp on mistakes that were made 100 years ago, but we've actually had some good successes. I think that, in Hawaii with the cycadal caspis scale, the ladybirds have been doing a very good job there. Purple loosestrife is a very good example in the Northeast, where they've released beetles to get that invasive plant under control. They've been releasing parasitoids for emerald ash borer. And in Florida, hydrilla is another successful program where they've released beetles and flies to manage this invasive weed that blocks up the waterways. So it can work. Augmentative biocontrol, and this is generally more of the arena I run in, and this is basically where people buy bugs and release them. There's several insectaries throughout the world, and many of the growers I work with buy their beneficials from these facilities where they're grown in labs, and then they actually release them out. No, they're not genetically engineered. These all, again, were initially collected from the wild. It's kind of like, it's basically a farm. Instead of raising chickens, they raise predatory mites, or they raise lacewings. And again, the growers buy them and they release them out. As you can see in this picture, she was actually applying predatory mites out onto this crop here. The third area of biocontrol, and I've actually been doing more work with this, especially since I work with some nursery production outside and theme parks. We're trying to preserve our local native beneficials, because one thing that I've seen a lot of through the years is you have a pest issue outside, somebody comes in and sprays a broad spectrum pesticide, and that kills everything, and that actually ends up wiping out more of the beneficials, and then you get a spike in the pest problem. So now when we do have to come in and spray, we want to select products that have minimal impact on our local beneficials, and as well as there's a big focus on pollinator protection these days, but I'm not a pollination specialist by any means. That's definitely left to another group of entomologists. Again, I deal with the plant feeding pests. Now, with this conservation of local beneficials, we really focus on what the pest is, and then look to see if beneficials are already present working on that problem for you. And again, if we do have to come in to do a knockdown, that we're going to time it correctly and have minimal impact. Also, a lot of times in a landscape setting, we can have a little bit higher of a pest threshold than you would on a plant that's going to be sold for retail inside of a grocery store or inside of a garden center. So we do have different thresholds for different types of situations. Now, where is all this stuff being used today? It's being used everywhere. Again, I'm working with landscapers, nurseries, greenhouses, interior, public gardens, theme parks, resorts. A lot of areas that are open to the public because of the concerns of spraying in front of the public. As soon as somebody sees somebody spraying something in a Tyvek suit, people immediately start getting sick and headaches. We had a situation with one of my customers where they were just spraying compost tea, but they were wearing Tyvek suits, and people around started getting sick and headachy from the compost tea. But you know, it's people's perception of what's going on. So that's why there's been a lot more interest in moving this direction, in addition to helping protect the environment and pollinators on there. Which, by the way, this dog on the right, this was actually at the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. I worked on a project with them with what they call the Messiah sculptures, and they had all these giant sculptures covered with plants, and we put a preventative biocontrol program together on these and released beneficials to prevent any pest issues on them, and that was one of the sculptures from it. So I also wanted to show you this, because this is a hybrid of augmentative biocontrol and conservation biocontrol. This is Metrolina Nurseries in Charlotte, North Carolina, and this is one of the mum fields. Way off in the distance back there, you can see part of their greenhouse. Their main greenhouse, I think, is at 170 acres, the one main greenhouse, and they've just added, I think, 30 more. But with their mums, you can see they're growing in these giant cement fields out here, and that's pretty uninviting for beneficials. So what we've done is developed a program using banker plants here that we did release beneficials on the banker plants, but then we're also inviting in any local beneficials to come in and say, hey, look, there's pollen and nectar here. So not only did we do release bugs, we're working on using our local natives there too. And this is a year later, where we've gone to a little bit different of a system. And what we did is at the end of the fields, instead of having them in line, we're using an assortment of plants. And we're basically making this into a beneficial garden and trialing different things to see what brings in the beneficials, what do we actually see on the plants. And also we can have different flower structures, different types of pollen, different bloom times. And doing these islands out there has really reduced the need for spraying out in the mum fields. So it's been a huge success. And I think this year will be, can't remember if it's our 5th or 6th year going into doing this program there. So again, you can have hybrid programs, and it's not always nice to see when people talk about things in theory, them actually being utilized out in the real world. This is an image from Bouchard Gardens up in British Columbia, and with their roses, what they've been doing is planting alyssum around the base. And what this is doing is providing floral resources for beneficial insects and parasitoids that then can move up into the roses, which we're going to talk about flower structure a little bit later, because, you know, everybody loves these roses with lots of petals. The problem is they're not necessarily good for pollinators, where this way you can provide the floral resources down below. And when I was there and I got down on my hands and knees, you could actually find Aureus, the minute pirate bug, down in the flowers down there. And these are excellent thrips feeders. They feed on spider mites and are a good generalist predator. So again, you're encouraging your native beneficial population. At the same time, if you wanted to boost your numbers, you could come through and apply Aureus down on the alyssum, and that could encourage more, so you can encourage the population there in the area. So the question is, who stays and who goes? Is it really a pest? Is it dead? Is it helping you out? This is what I'm doing all day long right now, since I have been at home because of the virus not being able to travel. People are sending me, I probably get 5 or 6 people contacting me a day to identify things. And a very, very small percent of insects are actually a problem for plants. Unfortunately, lots of beneficials get killed, and lots of insects that are innocuous and don't even do anything are getting killed. So it's really important to check to see if you really need to treat for it. And this is where ID is so important. Unfortunately, the internet has really become the Wild West on stuff. So it can be a great tool, but at the same time, I do see pictures of things that are wrong. So always look at the source. It's important to know who put that up. You know, try to stick to university websites. Bug Guide is an excellent website that can help with identification. Facebook, that makes me cringe because I'll see somebody post a picture and you'll get 20 different answers. And how are you supposed to know what the right one is? But identification is really important. And when we look to identify things, if you call me and you say you've got a bug, these are the kinds of questions I'm going to ask you. Is how many legs? Does it have wings? How many wings does it have? What do the antenna look like? Host plant size, location, all this kind of stuff to help us figure out what the problem is. One good resource to help identify beneficials is this book. If you do not own this book, do yourself a favor, spend like 25 bucks to buy this book. It's put out by the University of California. It's not going to tell you how to manage your pests, but it's going to tell you how to identify your beneficials. And it gives you images of all the different life stages of the beneficials and biology information on them. It's an excellent, excellent book. And when people ask me for a book recommendation for biocontrol, this I think is a good starter book for people to start with there. Now, if you can't find in this situation your beneficial in there, you're going to have to do a little more digging. Hand lenses are a requirement. I think everybody that works in our industry should carry a hand lens so you can get in there and look. And this is my other favorite thing. If you do not own a Dynalite, ask whoever to buy one for your next birthday, anniversary, whatever, or just, you know, buy it for yourself on Treat Yourself Day. It is a USB microscope that can hook to your phone, tablet, computer, and you can take pictures, videos, and this is what my growers are doing now. They can take the pictures and text them right to me, so they don't even have to take the time to go look stuff up. They can just send it to me, and I can be like, yes, it stays, no, it goes, it doesn't matter, or, oh, I need you to collect a sample to send it to me. This has brought pest management to a whole new level because we can in real time, we can problem solve. It is an excellent, excellent tool. And they are a company based out of California, and their software has been extremely easy to use, and they've been offering great technical support because I've had some issues, and I've always been able to get a human being when I call and to walk me through to fix my problems that I have. So I highly recommend that. So that way we know what's going on out in the field. Now, one of the pests we often deal with out in the field are aphids. And aphids are a little bit of a model pest we use a lot to talk about because so many things feed on them. And, you know, we can't cover all pests that everybody deals with, but I'm going to just talk about a few of them. And what I really want people to do is to kind of train themselves to think differently when they find a pest problem out there. So let's say you go out and you do find a high aphid population. And you're trying to make those decisions on, do you treat for it? Do you not? Well, you have to look at your situation too. Are you a commercial nursery grower? Are you a greenhouse grower? Are you a landscape? And you've got to look at your thresholds, because if you're outdoors, there's a good chance that native beneficials will come in. With my aphids I'm trying to rear here in my bedroom, I'm working really hard to make sure no beneficials get in. I don't want the window open up there that anything could come through the screen or anything, because it is amazing how the beneficials can find these aphid populations. But when you do find the aphids, it's really important to get in there and look. And this was a situation on some oleanders, where we found some of the oleander aphids around, and it was a nursery, and, you know, as this discussion, do we treat or not? Because yes, in a few days, these populations can explode. But if you get in there and look, and if you look to the right, those 3 grains of rice, those are actually predatory fly eggs. So if they were to come in and just do a blanket spray with even soap, there's a good chance they're going to kill those eggs. And you really want those eggs to hatch, because as soon as those eggs hatch, they're going to climb out and they're going to start feeding on your aphids. There's syrphid fly larvae, and syrphid fly larvae, which often gets mistaken for a caterpillar, they will, they kind of like bounce their heads along a leaf, and unfortunately because of Zoom you can't show videos. We tried, it does not work well, but they bounce their heads along. They have this unique behavior, and they literally grab aphids and suck their fluids out. So in that situation, in that nursery, don't spray anything. Let's flag these plants and come back and check them in a couple days, look to see where the population is at. And often in an outdoor setting like a nursery or in the landscape, the beneficials will come in. Again, if you're in an enclosed greenhouse, you're not going to have those beneficials easily coming in. Yes, later in the season, greenhouses sometimes open their sides, but generally greenhouses are much more buttoned up and exclude our natives from getting in. But these syrphid fly larvae are excellent predators. I actually saw them in the Bahamas eating whitefly, which I was really surprised because they're generally known as aphid feeders. Their adults are often called flower flies, and there's many species. In fact, there's a whole book that just came out on about 2 years ago on flower fly identification, which has a huge amount of information. But these guys, they call them hover flies too, because when they fly, they kind of hover around the plants. And how you know they're a fly and not a bee, because they mimic bees really well, is they only have one pair of wings. And again, they have the ability to hover. Bees can't hover like a helicopter. If you watch them, they tend to crash into flowers, where these guys come in and land more like a helicopter. But you can see how they mimic bees with their bodies, but only one pair of wings. And sometimes they'll land on your fingers or your skin, and their little spongy mouth part will lap, lap, lap some of your sweat off your skin. They're super cute. I really like having them around. And in their adult stage, they're pollinators. So it's a win-win. Larva's a meat eater on most of them, not all, but most, and the adults are pollinators. So there's something we definitely want around. Another beneficial that is easy to find often in pockets of aphids are these parasitoid wasps. There's one in the middle here. And in this kind of situation, and I really have to give credit to the industry, back in the 90s and early aughts, I can't tell you how many growers contacted me and said, I've been spraying and spraying these brown aphids. I can't kill them. I can't kill them. Now the industry is educated enough to know, oh my gosh, these aphids here in this picture, except for the one over here, they're all dead. And if you came in and even sprayed, you'd probably kill the parasitoids here, which you don't want to do. You want to let them finish their job off. So if this is going to a retail market, it might be a problem, because the homeowners aren't going to recognize that those are dead aphids and those are beneficials. But in a landscape setting, this is stuff we love to see, because we know that we're not going to have to spray, and it's going to take care of the pest issue for us out there. Also, sometimes with scales can be a real problem. And I know down in Texas, Airfon Valify is doing a ton of work on the crepe myrtle bark scale. And actually they have a 3 or 4 part webinar series coming up on dealing with it with sprays, on bios and everything. So if you want to learn about that, make sure you sign up for that webinar. But I just wanted to show you some examples on ligustrum, that this was a plant I found at a nursery. But interestingly enough, when I got in there and looked at it under my microscope, up on the top right, you can see these circle exit holes. So there was actually already a parasitic wasp in here working on controlling the scale problem here. But when scales die, they don't come off the plants. It's kind of like a turtle shell glued on the plant. And so that's why you got to get in there with that hand lens and look to see if the scales are alive or dead. We'll often flip them over and see if there's any movement underneath, or if there's anything left inside of them after the parasitoid is finished. So you got to make sure you get in there and check. Same thing here with this scale, this Latinia scale on a Cuba. A grower had been spraying repeatedly to control this. But again, when we looked under the microscope, there were exit holes. And unfortunately, because of the pesticides they were spraying, they had killed most of the parasitoids that were actually trying to control the scale for them. And this parasitoid was actually dead right there in its little exit hole, where if they would have selected products like horticultural oil, insecticidal soap, or insect growth regulators, that have minimal impact on these parasitoids, they could have had the benefit of spraying and the benefit of the parasitoids working together. Now they've had the problem that their parasitoids are all dead. They had such a hot residue on their plants that beneficials couldn't even get in there for a couple months because of the product they've been spraying. So they kind of created their own problem there because they didn't take the time to get in and really look and see what was going on before they started spraying. Caterpillars are another one that depends on who you are. If you're a butterfly gardener, you'll love them. If you are a home gardener with vegetable gardens, you don't always love them. But luckily, there's lots of things that eat them, especially wasps. I didn't realize till I moved to Pennsylvania from South Florida, and I would just, again, sit and watch the paper wasps here, how much caterpillar eating they do. I've got lots of images like on the top right where they just are chowing down on caterpillars because they're kind of like a Slurpee in a bag for them, and easy to eat. And wasps get a really bad rap because you say wasp to people, everybody hates them. There's all those memes talking about what jerks they are. But a lot of them are beneficial. You guys don't have to deal with Japanese beetles down here. And again, I grew up in South Florida, zone 9. When I moved to Pennsylvania, I was so excited to see Japanese beetles. But it's very interesting because this particular blue-winged wasp here actually burrows in the ground, and it is a predator of the Japanese beetles in the soil. And so learning about your pests and learning what beneficials are already there that can help you can really help you manage pests. And again, in public areas, I know we can't have paper wasp nests and things like that, but we should give them the credit for doing a lot of good things that they do. Now, some of the wasps are super small, and oftentimes when you show this to people, everybody thinks that these are eggs. These are actually the cocoons of wasps that the mama wasp had laid the eggs inside of this caterpillar. The eggs hatch, they ate the inside, and then the wasp larvae pop out the back and they spin cocoons. I actually have video footage of these wasp larvae spinning cocoons in the back, and then they pupate just like a butterfly does. So these are the cocoons like a butterfly, and then they emerge out. And you can see on the right over here, right where one had already emerged out of this. So I was actually, and here comes the cat. Sorry. Okay, cat, you gotta go. Sorry. Knew that was gonna happen. I was actually at a tomato production facility, and they had lots of caterpillars with the mummies on the back of the caterpillars, but they had the workers going there and removing them. And in this situation, you want to leave them because you want that next generation of parasitoids to emerge out so that they can control more caterpillars. Stink bugs are actually a great predator also for caterpillars. There's some great stink bug ID guides out there online. I actually, on my website, which is not the best website in the world, but if you go to the home page on Buglady Consulting, on the left, there's a link that says books. And if you click on books, it takes you to a list of reference material. And in there, I have a stink bug ID PDF you can download, because some stink bugs are plant feeders, like the invasive brown marmorated stink bugs, and some are beneficial, like this predatory stink bugs here. And it's important to learn the difference between them out there in the field. Now, lady beetles are not a pest, but I do think it's important to talk about them, because when you talk about ladybugs, most people always think about the Hippodamia convergent, which is our generic red ladybug, but there are so many different ladybird species out there working. This here is actually a rose garden where they were having some very serious spider mite issues. What we had done in this situation is we'd really backed off the conventional broad spectrum sprays, and we were moving into releasing actually predatory mites here. And then what we saw is a whole list, I guess, of native beneficials move in. And there are ladybird species that are specialists on spider mites. And that's what this ladybird here was doing, was in here feeding on the spider mites. In the past, with the products they were spraying, they would have killed these ladybugs off or repelled them away with the products. And you can see, here's the ladybird beetle, and right in front, there's a spider mite egg. So it lets you can see how small some of these ladybirds are. Some of the other ones, like on the right, this is actually one of our natives. I call it CMAC, but it's Comiomagilla. Some people call them pinks. There's several names for it. In their diet, half their diet is 50% of their diet is pollen. So it's important to have those pollen resources around if you want them. And if you look over here on the left, again, this is why it's important to know life cycles. This is actually a ladybird beetle larva on the left, probably like a Scymnus species, and it's feeding on these aphids on this milkweed plant. So again, it's important to identify them. If you show this to a lot of people, they may think it's a mealybug and think that maybe you need to spray to treat for it. So again, understanding what the beneficials look like and all their different life stages is really important. Now, when ladybugs are young and they first hatch out, they don't necessarily eat like we do, where, you know, we eat a donut and it disappears. They're actually a little more vampire-y when they're young. And what's happening here is this ladybird beetle larva is actually grabbing this aphid, and it's literally just extracting the fluids out of it. It was actually quite cool to sit and watch that happen, because the aphids just kind of shrink down. It's like a deflating balloon there. Now, there are other beetles, and I think it's important for people to get to know them. Soldier beetles are a great group. You know, just go to Bug Guide and Google soldier beetles, or Google soldier beetles and then whatever state you're in, so you can learn what they look like. This particular soldier beetle species I find in my elm trees all the time, predating on aphids. And it's become it's become a regular thing for me to do, is to climb up into my elm tree when we have these aphid outbreaks and see what's up there. But soldier beetles, ground beetles, tiger beetles, it's important to learn what they look like for your area. I know that often with insects, that stuff that gets posted on, you know, social media, or all the big fancy exotic stuff, you have enough really cool stuff right in your yard that you can look at and be amazed with, but you have to get out there and start looking. Now, one of the big questions I get a lot is, how can we support these good guys? Can we bring them in? And absolutely we can. There is research that supports this. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of bad information. I see some of the recommendations people are doing with what plants to plant together. And to me, sometimes it just makes no sense because remember, there's a lot of regionality, and what worked in Vermont may not work in Texas, which may not work in Oregon, which may not work in Kansas. So we do have to look at where the research was done, and then how can we apply that to our area. There was a bunch of work done with euonymus scale on plants, and this was done with Cliff Sadoff up at Purdue University. Cliff, he does some great research on a lot of the landscape pests. But what they basically did is, I'll just show you the picture. They took euonymus with euonymus scale, and then they planted plants around it. And then they put a plot of euonymus with no flowers, and they had low flowers and high flowers. And what they wanted to see is, how does this impact the level of parasitism by the little parasitoid that controls euonymus scale. And basically they found in general, which we all know the answer to this, when you had euonymus plants that were surrounded by flowering plants, we had the most beneficials. What was very interesting though is they're like, well, hey, let's go pick all those flowers off and see what happens. And this is what was super interesting. It did not affect patterns of natural enemy abundance or dispersion within the landscape. So even without those blooms, just having that biodiversity, they still had the same amount of beneficials, which really goes to show you part of the key here is biodiversity, not necessarily always the bloom, but biodiversity is really a key for these beneficials out there. There was other research done, University of Illinois, that was funded by the CSREES group. And what they did is They took conifers, planted them with hardwood mulch around, and then they inoculated them with armored scales. So they're going to put the pest on there. And then on some of the plants, they used insectary plants of white clover, goldenrod, a spurge, and a coreopsis. And then they had a control situation here. And what they found is that beneficial insects are as much as 10 times more abundant in the insectary plantings as in the control plots, which again, we kind of all know that. But what was interesting too, which is good to have this research, is the mortality of the pest scale was double where they had the planting. So they had twice as many dead scale insects where they put these other plants around them. So basically, having the plants around these coreopsis and spurge and things like that were bringing in the beneficials that in turn were then help managing the pests. And they did the same thing too. They picked those blooms off, and they got higher level of beneficials, which I don't quite understand, but still the fact that they even would get the same level of control was still very interesting to me, which goes back to biodiversity on there. Now, Paula Shrewsbury is an excellent research entomologist at the University of Maryland. She's married to Mike Rupp. They're like a power couple of entomology. And several years ago, she started looking at lace bugs because that's a big problem in many parts of the country on azaleas. And for you that aren't familiar with lace bugs, it's a lace bug on the lower right. It's the one on the left, actual photos from my mom's yard in Florida, which she's in zone 8. At her house, but the lace bug I actually took in my friend's yard in Portland, Oregon. But they can be quite devastating. So what they did is they added in basically a chrysanthemum, a Shasta daisies, and coriander, which we all know, the herb cilantro out there, and to see how this would impact the lace bug populations. So obviously, as we know from histories, when you add the flowers, you are going to bring in more beneficials when you have them around, and you get a buildup of syrphids, ladybird beetles, and other predators that were around to help manage the pests. That's what we did know. But when they went and they actually did a release of lacewing, because lacewing larvae are known to be a predator of lace bugs, if they had floral resources, would they stay around? And what they found was where they released lacewings, they did feed on the lacewings, but they didn't stay. And they're not quite sure. They're not sure if there was predation issues where the predators ate each other, but it's not like that. They put the beneficials out, and adding these resource plants caused that population to stay. They dispersed or died after that, and they're not quite sure why. So don't expect, if you do augmentative releases and add floral resources, that, oh, you're done and you can walk away, because the beneficials may not choose to stay. Also, beneficials generally, if they don't have enough food source, they're not going to stay. They're going to leave because you're putting out an unnatural level of predators in a geographic area. Now, something else they looked at too was how the textures of the plants affected things. And I put I cited these papers in here because I think it's really good for people to go read, at least read the abstracts of these, because again, even though you're not dealing with lace bugs directly, this may give you some ideas on how to manage some of your own pests. But it was interesting that in this situation with azaleas and lace bugs, and by having overstory trees over top of the azaleas, they actually saw fewer lace bugs in those areas. And there were fewer beneficials in the sunny areas, but more predators in the shaded areas. And so it's kind of the question of, are the beneficials going to those shady areas? Do lace bugs not like being in the shady areas? But what they basically found out in the research is it's this having a more diverse structural difference, textural differences in plants make it more attractive to beneficials, which is what they found in all that other research, is basically breaking up a monoculture and having diversity. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be blooming plants, but just having this diversity can really help reduce some of these pest populations out there. There's another really good study. I love dandelions. I know, it's un-American or it used to be un-American. Now it's, you know, kind of more in fashion to keep your dandelions. But this was some interesting work that was done up in Nebraska and with Kentucky. And from from the dandelions and white clovers and lawn, which again, I try to have as much as possible. They've collected 50 different species of insects and pollinators and how important they're have out there. And by bringing in, and I know that pollinators are not necessarily predators, but in the case of things like syrphid flies, the larva is a predator. And a lot of these little tiny parasitoid wasps, they feed on pollen and nectar as adult. Their larval stage are the meat eaters. So providing these pollen and nectar resources for them can bring in these beneficials that will then, they can lay their eggs and help control some of your pest issues out there. So there's lots of great research out there supporting that by having these plants and diversity, instead of having, you know, 7 acres of just solid grass, by breaking it up and having more diversity of clover and dandelions and things like that, you can bring in more beneficials. And that's kind of the take home message, is biodiversity attracts beneficials. And that's something that I'm working on. We were talking about that a little bit before. We have 7 acres here, and I'm putting 2 acres back into as much as possible native plants slowly. This is like a lifetime project. And I'm watching these plants to see what beneficials go to them. And how did I decide what plants to use? So first of all, I didn't use marigolds. No, to me, it's funny. Everybody's like, oh, plant marigolds up north. They bring beneficials. The first year I planted marigolds, the Japanese beetles mowed them down. Next time, spider mites destroyed them. They're a very pesty plant, and they're not native, so I'm not doing those. So what I did is I started looking online. I saw all kinds of, you know, plant impatiens, do petunias, they bring beneficials. What I did is I looked at this study, is kind of where I started several years ago. And yes, this is for Pennsylvania, but this would be a great project for all states to do something this intensive. And I realized for the Texas people, you're in a different growing zone, but I know there are people on here from all over the country. What Penn State did in 2013 is they did a pollinator trial. And what they did is they basically planted plots of all these plants and got their master gardeners and other people to go sit in front of them and monitor who came to those plants and how often. They also looked at, you know, weed suppression, maintenance, bloom. They looked at all these different kinds of things, and they came up with this list. And I'm only showing you a small section. This is available online. You can go Google it. But I was interested in, well, first of all, I want to know who brought the most flies in, but they didn't add a fly category for this. But they looked at pollinator visitor diversity. But remember, for me, a lot of the flies are important because they are pollinators, not just bees. And so these were their top 8 plants. Pygnanthium, which is a mint, is something that I've been growing, and oh my gosh, they weren't kidding. I love sitting next to my patch of it with my camera when it's in bloom, because the level of beneficials on it it's crazy. Things like Joe Pye weed. Milkweed is one that people always think about monarchs. I actually do a whole presentation on life beyond monarchs on milkweed, because there's so much biodiversity that happens on our milkweed plants. But there's a lot of cool plants out there. And also just sheer number of insects visits. And again, this Pygnanthium, the clustered mountain mint, is really, really good for bringing in flying in insects. So basically, I went through these lists, pulled a ton of plants out of here that I've ordered the seeds from. A bunch of this, again, I already have in my yard. I'm adding to it. I just ordered 25 new plant species to add in like I said before, I've started 109 flats of seeds so far. And again, I got 25 new varieties of plants on their way. So, and if anybody wants to come down and help seed, I'll be glad to have the help. But again, these are the things that we need to put into our landscapes. Now, are you going to put Pygnanthium in the landscape right next to the entrance of a restaurant? Of course not. But in some areas of other areas, like that are off the beaten path or other areas, you might be able to put these in to provide these resources for them. This is on the mountain mint, and this is a canid fly. I think they're super beautiful because of all their little hairs on there. If you don't know about canid flies, definitely Google them and learn about them. Several of the species will actually lay eggs, which you can see right here on the back of other insects. They'll do it on caterpillars, stink bugs, and things. And they're the larva, again, it's a meat eater, so they can help control other pest insects out there. Now, granted, yes, they can eat some butterflies too, but you know, it's a give or take on the plants, because it's Mother Nature herself doesn't define what's good and bad as far as insects go. Humans have decided what's good and bad. So it depends on your perception of an insect, because you say praying mantis, most people say good. You know, for me, the Chinese mantids I've got everywhere in my yard, they're feeding on pollinators. So I kind of put them a little in the bad category. So you have to think about who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and what plants will work there. They also did a number of bee and syrphid visits, which again, syrphid flies in particular, very interesting. And they actually broke down the numbers of how many different species were visiting. And again, these are the average numbers of visitors in 2 minutes. So you can see how good these plants are for feeding a lot of these beneficials. Now, something to be aware of, and this is something I've been doing a lot more reading on, is if you say just plant Monarda, Monarda is not Monarda. There's all these different cultivars. And what they're finding too with a lot of the bee work is that a lot of plants have been bred for human characteristics, not necessarily what's the right food to feed these beneficials, because some of the new echinacea and stuff basically are not good food resources in there. So in this particular part of their study, they did compare different cultivars and find that different cultivars perform differently for different pollinators out there. So you do kind of have to look close at that. And also, this was something I found very interesting from the work too, is flower shape kind of matters. Because again, everybody loved these hybrid teas, the super petally roses. The pollinators can't get in there. The predators can't. The syrphid, what do they like? They like those open, flat flowers of the more old-fashioned roses where they can get in there and do the work. So, you know, it's having a little bit of both to make the right kind of situation where you can have your showy plants, but you want to make sure you feed your, you know, beneficials while you're out there so that they can work for you. Because again, all those native beneficials are free workers. The ones you have to buy, they are going to cost you money, but they're good workers if you put them in the right situation for the right pests and don't kill them with pesticide sprays. Which again, you know, that's a whole nother discussion about how do you select pesticide products. But if you work closely with insectaries that produce the biocontrol agents, they can help you to understand how pesticides impact the different beneficials out there. And that said, that's the end of what I have.
Well, that was all very wonderful. That was really great. So thanks so much, Suzanne, for that incredible presentation. I took quite a few notes on some stuff. And so we're going to open it up for a question and answer for a little while. And there are some kind of chat questions on here. I think a lot of people in our area just want to hear your take on controlling mosquitoes, if there's any kind of advice on that front. That might be the first question to get to is, you know, just any notions on mosquitoes.
Well, on that note, I pretty much stay in my lane. Mosquito entomologists are very different than the plant people. I don't work in mosquito control. I mean, I know enough to be dangerous, but I know enough to not say anything because that's really not my area of expertise. I mean, there's always the, oh, don't have the standing water, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I'm not a mosquito specialist. I'm sorry.
Well, and I appreciate that input. I might just refrain and rephrase the question. Is I know dragonflies will eat some mosquitoes here and there. Are there any specific plants you can think of that pull in dragonflies?
No. You know,
mosquitoes.
And having the right, and you know, flow rate in water makes a difference on what you have there. If you're not familiar with Chris Goforth, she's in North Carolina. She goes under Dragonfly Woman. She she's your dragonfly person to talk to. She's a freshwater entomologist, and she's really good, and she tracks all the swarms and all that kind of stuff. Because I know when I was talking to her about doing some trapping in my creek, that's one of the things we were talking about was flow rate of my water, and you know, what kind of currents you'll see, what kind of beneficials where, and that kind of stuff, because that all makes a difference. But that is not my wheelhouse.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, for some reason in our yard, we don't have a ton of mosquitoes, but I think it's because I haven't sprayed very much. And so maybe just encouraging that cycle of life.
It's possible. And also there's predatory mosquito larvae. I know when I was down just south of Austin, I was down there doing some photography work. That one of the things we did was, and we found the predatory mosquito larvae, because you can find them. They're the larvae in the water with the mosquitoes. They are, so I mean, there are things that feed on them, just people aren't as aware of them. But again, getting out of my comfort zone because it's
Sure.
not a plant feeder. Sorry.
No, no worries, no worries. Well, we do have a few text questions, chat questions about plant feeders. Gonna just jump to this one about thrips. So Western flower thrips and chili thrips can be devastating on roses. So
Yep.
they're beneficials that can help control these pests.
Yes and no. So Western flower thrips, absolutely. Western flower thrips have been one of the key ornamental pests in greenhouses for years, and vegetables. There's a ton of research. There's predatory mites, things like cucumaris. There's another one called Swirsky. One of the key things to Western flower thrips management is they drop to the soil to pupate. And often what happens is people just come through and they spray the foliage, and when they do that, they're only hitting basically the babies and the toddlers of the thrips and adults. They're not treating for eggs, nor are they treating for the pupa that's in the soil. So you come through, you spray, and then you have the eggs hatch right out, or the ones from the soil come right back up. So that's why with Western flower thrips, you have to hit them from a multi-pronged approach of, you know, applications to the foliage as well as beneficials to the soil. You know, this is going to, I mean, are you a botanical garden? Are you a commercial grower? You know, these all make a difference on how you're going to approach it. But for knockdowns from eco-friendly standpoint, there's several products on the market now that contain Bavaria bassiana, which is a fungus that attacks Western flower thrips, and it does a really good job on whitefly too. And that's something we use often as a foliar spray in conjunction with predatory mites like cucumaris or Swirsky, because that particular fungus won't kill the predatory mites. So they can work hand in hand together. And so in a greenhouse situation where someone's growing, you know, spring color, we'll use the mites, we'll use the Bavaria, and then apply something like beneficial nematodes to the soil. Out in the landscape environment, and this is where, you know, we've had our challenges with roses, because the landscapers, you tend to use broader spectrum products that tend to kill your native beneficials and make it unhospitable for introduced beneficials. And that has to do a lot with the price point on the spray products. So that's been a little more challenging, but as you saw, the one rose garden that was having the thrips issue, that's why they were doing all the alyssum. Now down in, when you're getting into zone 9, zone 10, you're going to have heat issues, and alyssum doesn't like super hot heat. There are some newer cultivars, I think Syngenta has some genetics on it, but you're better off looking for more heat tolerant local varieties that will help support aureus. How do you find what those are? Do what I do. You plant a bunch of stuff and watch and see what happens and see where they're at, because aureus are really easy to find in plants. You can just bang the plants out over a board and they'll fall out. When it comes to chili thrips, I will say we had one situation in the landscape of chili thrips in Florida where we did apply the predatory mite Swirsky. It was really expensive to do, very expensive, but it did work. But it was in the parking lot of a public place where they couldn't get in to spray because it was basically open 24/7. So in that kind of situation, we could get it to work, and we've used Swirsky on the interior scape with chili thrips before. But the problem is if you have a 50-acre nursery, that's not economically feasible to use the predatory mite Swirsky in that situation, and you're going to have to come in and spray and put a spray program together for it. Also, chili thrips, the nematodes don't work for them because they're physically too small for the nematodes to get inside of them. So that's the very long answer to, yes, there are options, but it totally depends on, again, are you a landscaper? Are you a nursery? Are you a propagator? Are you retail? You know, you have to look at the situation and see which is going to work for your environment.
Yeah, we the Swirsky is something that I've used for chili thrips in a smaller setting, and it was successful. I got them from arpacode.com. Are there other sites that you can think of that are good sources for mites like that?
So I'm pretty picky, and everybody knows this. I think it's important to buy direct from the actual insectaries that are actually producing it, so the bugs come straight to you right out of the bug farm. The key players here in North America, and this is in no particular order, but there's BioBest, there's BioLine, there's Copert, there's BioBee, and Beneficial Insectary. I will say Beneficial Insectary has their location in California, and so their US production. BioBee is based out of Israel. Copert, BioLine, and BioBest are all European-based companies. Oh, did we lose you?
I just typed some of those into the group chat. So if you guys want to kind of track back and check those out, they're there on the group chat. So a big question, a lot of these questions are vegetable production related, it looks like. And so one of them, you know, we've got kind of like mostly tomato and tomato threats like leaf-footed stink bugs, harlequin bugs, and then armyworms, caterpillars that will destroy the leaves.
Well, when it comes to caterpillars, and this is going to completely depend on the species. I mean, a lot of people are very familiar with BT, which is a toxin off a bacterium, but there's been a lot more focus lately on, there's a tiny parasitic wasp, a parasitoid, it's called trichogramma, and there's multiple species of it. And it is actually, again, a parasitoid to the egg. So it comes in and it lays its egg inside the caterpillar egg. So it gets it even before it hatches. In fact, it was this morning when I was laying in bed scrolling through Instagram, there was a post from Brazil and it looks like they're doing it in Brazil, and there's been work done in France where they're flying drones now, and they're literally dropping little balls with trichogramma inside of them out through the cornfields, because trichogramma is not a strong flyer, so you have to have lots of release points, and they drop these balls out, and the trichogramma come out of these balls and then go parasitize the eggs of the caterpillars. So this is stuff that's coming pretty fast, this information and technology, because we've been doing drone releases with predatory mites for a couple of years now, and lacewings and things like that. I don't work a ton with trichogramma because, again, I don't spend a ton of time in like farm field vegetable production, but Beneficial Insectary produces multiple species. That's who I would contact to ask. And the first thing they're going to ask is what species of caterpillar, because again, you have to get the right trichogramma for the right species, and there may not be a trichogramma species for every caterpillar egg out there, but I know they use them a lot too with like the crucifers, like broccoli for, you know, the sulfurs and whites and those kinds of butterfly, because the caterpillars are pretty destructive in those areas. So that's the direction I would send you for that. As far as sorry?
What do you think about like just encouraging paper wasps? Is there a way to do that more quickly? I guess, you know, planting those plants that you've kind of listed already.
Yeah, but again, you can only have so many predators in a given area.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole balance to this kind of stuff, because even if you had a herd of cows in your front yard and you airdropped 50 lions in, 50 lions aren't going to be there in 3 weeks. You know, they're going to eat and then they're going to leave. And that's, predators tend to disperse because there's no food, and it's just the natural balance of things. Everything goes back into balance. And that's why with augmentative biocontrol, we're releasing every week or every other week. It's not that you release and the beneficials just stay, because they typically run out of food and they don't stay in those high densities. And so, I mean, I do think encourage them is important. I mean, definitely my home garden. Yes, I plant lots of alyssum, I plant calendula, I've got, you know, my pygnanthium, the mountain mint around. I'm trying a bunch of new things this year, definitely to try to encourage them. but there's a difference between your home garden and commercial production. But if you're out in California and you go through like the organic farm fields out there, you'll see between rows of peppers, they have huge strips of alyssum planted out there. So they are doing some of this intercropping. And the University of Florida did some really good research several years ago looking at sunflowers and intercropping sunflowers in corn and showing how that brings in things like Aureus, the minute pirate bug, which is a great thrips predator and spider mite predator and will feed on young caterpillars and things like that. So it's interesting that we do have a lot of research, but it's not, people aren't necessarily taking this and then applying it as much as we could, because I think it's a scary thing to do, to take production area out to add in plants to encourage insects, which goes against probably everything every farmer has ever felt in their bones. You're muted again.
Yeah, for sure. The thinking about leaf-footed bugs, which I guess are kind of a problem and a solution by themselves, and then millipede or centipedes, or other detrivores like pill bugs and even
Pill
roaches.
bugs are becoming a bigger issue. You know where it's interesting? It's becoming a big problem in cannabis growers that do living soil. And because they've got all this organic matter, they don't change their media out, and they're literally eating the young cannabis plants. They're chewing right on the stems. I haven't personally tried this, but it looks like that you can get spinosad baits. Spinosad is it is a pesticide, but the active ingredient spinosad is approved for use in organic production. So as long as you got, a formulation that meets with the organic standards, you could use it as an organic person. But there are baits made with spinosad targeting for pill bugs.
That's great. So would that solution potentially apply for like centipedes too?
Nope.
Or millipedes?
Centipedes,
Okay.
Centipedes are generally they're predators. If you've got centipedes, what are they eating on? Get rid of their food source. That's the same thing with people with spiders. People are like, oh my gosh, I've got spiders in my house. Well, then there's bugs there that they're feeding on. Get rid of their insect problem, and then you won't have spiders.
I mean, I guess maybe I'm thinking of millipedes or something like that. There's some kind of detrivore that's working through.
Millipedes are more, again, detritivores that eat breaking down leaf litter. I mean, we had them really bad in Florida. You get heavy rains and millions of them would come streaming up the walls. Quite biblical. Super cool as a kid.
But it might be a sign of some other health problem if you've got that many.
Yeah, well, and again, I think sometimes, and I'm not a soil scientist, but I think sometimes people are over enriching their soils, because it's been very interesting, working, because again, I do work heavily with a lot of these hemp and cannabis growers, where it seems like the living soil people are having a lot more of the pest issues, because I do think they're almost enriching their soils too much. And have too much organic matter, too much microbial activity, and the mites that feed on fungus just go gangbusters with the numbers. And a lot of these things that like to feed on springtail, I mean, I've seen pictures with like a foot wide swath of springtails winding its way through a greenhouse, because there's just so much organic matter in the soil. So I think you can overdo it a bit.
That's great.
So
I know that we don't. The last question, really appreciate your time, is another one we deal with in Houston pretty commonly, and it's citrus leaf miner.
Yes.
We see the little tracks on there, so if you could kind of educate us a little bit on those.
There goes the cat
again.
Yeah,
we knew it. The kitty passed by.
So it's interesting. I actually have dealt with citrus leaf miner issues in Bermuda. So there are naturally occurring parasitoids. I think in Florida, there's 9 different ones that actually will help control citrus leaf miner. And it's one of those balance things, because if you're spraying for citrus leaf miner, are you going to impact the parasitoid that kills the citrus leaf miner? Unfortunately, the parasitoid for it, one of them is not they're not commercially available. There was somebody in California rearing them for a while, which I wish they would, so that homeowners could purchase them to encourage them. But it kind of comes back to assessing to see if you have them. If you have them, can you encourage them? Because oftentimes when you see citrus, either you see absolutely no plant material under it, it's just bare dirt, or you just have grass under it. And that's not very conducive, again, for having these beneficials in there. And so possibly by providing some of these floral resource areas close, you might be able to encourage some of these parasitoids, because they're around. You just have to say, hey, come to my yard. But citrus leaf miner, for the most part, I mean, I know it can get out of control sometimes, but it's more of an aesthetic problem. It just makes your tree look bad, because it was really, for a while, it was really bad in Florida, but then the parasitoids seemed to start working better on it. But now, because of everything else is killing citrus leaf miner doesn't seem to be as, I mean, and now that we are going to allow the importation of citrus from China, the fruit, which I just can't believe we're going to allow this to happen, we're going to bring in some other disease or insect that's just going to finish citrus off. Because again, in the past, just citrus leaf miner, if that's the only thing your tree had to deal with, it probably can do it. But now if it's got, you know, if it's got the virus and, you know, all the citrus russet mite and all these other pests, it just can't handle all the different ones. So long story short, is read up on the parasitoids, see if you actually have them, see if you can encourage them by providing, you know, a more biodiverse habitat for them. Or if you have nothing to do, you can go out and just crush them all in your leaf. Take a little pen and boop, 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 you can kill them. Again, this is it a homeowner or is it an orchard? You know, it's very different on management options. But I did want to say, though, I saw the one question go by, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, because someone was asking about seed sources. And I have to say, I ordered seeds from several companies this year. And some of them were, one company took 47 days to ship my seed order. And they shorted me in my actual packages of seeds, because don't think I'm not counting my seeds when I get them. But this one company, I have to say, and I just want to grab their name, I should know it by now. But what I really like about their website is, let me get here, if my computer will stop being stupid, is you can go in, first of all, I ordered more seeds yesterday and they already shipped today. And what I like about their website is you can go in and it's Everwild Farms, EVERWILDE Farms, and you can go into their website and you can put in what part of the country you're in. Do you want perennials? Do you want annuals? Do you want spring bloomers? Do you want this? And it will, and they give really good history on the plants. And then they have great map too. Is it native to this county? Is it native to this state? Is it native to this part of the United States? And so that's how I was able to go through and select more plants, because sure, you know, I kept like, ooh, native lupines, I want to grow those. Okay, native lupines do not grow in Eastern Pennsylvania. So as much as I want them, there's no point in going that route. And so I ended up picking all these other weird plants I've never even heard of, but are native to this area that I didn't even know existed. And I found that website out of all the seed companies I dealt with, and their seed numbers have been good. Their packaging's good. They tell you if they need scarification, how long. I can't say enough good things about that website. I cannot.
That's awesome. And it's kind of difficult to find great websites sometimes, especially for seeds.
Yeah,
well,
I'm blown away.
That's awesome. Thanks for that advice, and thanks for all the other advice that you've given us today. Big hand for Suzanne, woo, Bug Lady. So hopefully, while she had it up there, you got her stuff. But pretty much, if you just kind of put in Bug Lady anywhere on the internet, you'll either find the superhero or you'll find her. So do that. We at OBA are just so honored you guys come. Feel free to check out our website, obaonline.org, OHBA online.org. Great chance to become a member. We do a lot of good education. And in 2 weeks, we have another one of these, and it should be really special because I believe we have a very special person coming to that. So just stay tuned. Our Facebook page will have it. We'll have it on our website. And we're still planning to do a kind of a conference day-long seminar in August about organic, like treating your lawn and your gardens, veggie gardens, fruit trees, whatever, organically. And so that'll be a big full day thing we're doing, and hopefully we'll be live, but you never know on that stuff. So appreciate you guys coming in. Again, big thanks to Suzanne for being here, and stay tuned because we got good stuff going on.
Well, thanks again for having me. Sorry I couldn't make it down there this year, but I know that through the emails, you're still going to try to get me down at some point.
Absolutely.
So we can do some more interactive stuff. I had a great time last time I was down, and the food was amazing. And considering I've been having to eat at home for 8 weeks now, I'm ready for restaurant food.
Yeah, well, we'll get you down as soon as we can. And yeah, if it weren't for this this crazy virus going away, we would have had you in, and that'd have been a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
thanks so much for making time for us here. And again, big thanks to everybody who showed up to listen. So
Yeah, thanks everybody for showing up tonight. And I've been doing more webinars and Zoom meetings around. I keep them posted on my social media accounts. I'm doing some more question and answer on, actually, I think a little bit more greenhouse stuff next week. That is a free event. I think I'm doing that Tuesday. But if you guys need anything, just reach out. I'll be here.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Suzanne. And we will talk to you very, very soon.
All right. Thank you.
That's it, everybody. Have a great night and stay safe.